the artists from around the world. And tonight we have the project, Electronica project, Project P. Um, you're from New York City?
I'm actually originally from Boston, Massachusetts. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Are you in Boston now, or are you in New York?
No, I've moved to Virginia, so I'm in the DMV
Oh,
area.
you're. Oh, cool.
Hmm.
Um, so we're going to go through the questions that we sent you. So I hope you have them in front of you, but we'll just go through them. So when did you first get into music? At what age?
Um, I was technically five. I actually grew up in a really musical household. My dad was a musician in his 20s. So he put me in piano lessons at age five. Um, and I kind of switched teachers over the years and did it on and off. But I pretty much did piano from when I was five up to high school, so when I was like 17.
Well, that's a good writing instrument. I'm a keyboard player myself, and as synthesizer players, I think they'll benefit from piano lessons, or I think anybody in electronic music and music production, because once you get a MIDI keyboard, having the knowledge of piano helps you actually be a songwriter.
Hmm.
So I think it's a really good basis, because either you start on an acoustic guitar, songwriters, are guitar-based songwriters, or piano-based songwriters, or like MIDI instrument. So I think it's a good place to start from.
Hmm.
So how long have you been working on your own music?
So I've been producing since October of last year, so it's been almost 10 months now.
So what made you decide that you wanted to write your own music? Because a lot of people who are musicians, they go and they become like work in orchestras or become like studio musicians, but they don't write their own music. What made you want to write your own music?
Yeah, so I knew I was drawn to composition right around the time I actually stopped playing piano. So I was about 16. I started trying to write my own piano scores just because it was just like a creative part of me to want to make my own music rather than just, playing the sheet music that was in front of me. But I went to university shortly after that, so I didn't really have time to learn how to compose music. So
Hmm.
that's what I've really been learning for the last 10 months. But I feel like because I played piano for so long, much of it is really intuitive. So,
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. So so did you have a piano in your home, or did you have access to a piano when you were learning piano?
yeah, so we had like a keyboard, and then eventually they got a grand piano.
Cool. That's always great to have a real acoustic piano. Just because
Hmm.
there's nothing like it. It's like a guitar player would say there's nothing like having a real guitar. And I think any keyboard player would say well, it's good to have a Hammond B3 organ or a really good electric piano or a very good like a Yamaha piano or anything that's like equivalent.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, there's nothing like it.
Especially because you have like the weight of the keys too. So I find.
Yeah, I mean the thing. Yeah, yeah. I think that's interesting because synthesizers actually have a different action. They have what is called a synth action, which is way lighter than a real piano. And for some things, like I'm a big Roland and Moog. I have actual hardware synthesizers, and I've been playing them for like 30 years. And there's some advantages to the synth action that's lighter because it lets you do things on a synthesizer that if you have a weighted keyboard, you can't really do it as like the synth action allows you to do certain types of expression on synthesizers that's a little different. Um, but weighted keys is a good experience, I think, to have. And there are synthesizers that have weighted keys, but a lot of synthesizer players will tend to go with the synth action instead.
Yeah.
So who are your influences and who would you like say are your reference points when you listen to your music? I have some ideas after I listen to your tracks on SoundCloud, but if you were going to tell somebody like, well, who do you sound like, or who are you influenced by? Who would you name check?
Um, Honestly, I I have a lot of artists who I do like, but I'm not sure if I can say that I'm directly influenced by them, but I grew up really loving Sade and also Mariah Carey. And my dad, he listened to a lot of Fela Kuti. So I kind of grew up with Afrobeat. And I feel like,
Oh,
yeah, I
mhm.
feel like that because I'm really into percussion. And usually, like the songs that I write, I tend to start with the drums just because that's like the percussion is really my favorite part of it. So I feel like that is mainly influenced by the Afrobeat that I grew up listening to.
So how did you get into electronica? Because like in electronica, a lot of artists that create electronica, it kind of came from electronic music, bands like Kraftwerk, Duran Duran, New Order, Depeche Mode. So I was wondering where the synthwave influence came from, or the electronica influence.
I think probably from video games because I'm also
Oh,
really into video
or eight
games.
bit video.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like the 8-bit, 16-bit music. But I do hear in your music it's like less video game and more like new wave, new romantic
Mm-hmm.
sound. Because a lot of the pads that you're playing, like I was listening to a couple of songs like Space Jam and Nostalgia in particular has some like trance, new wave type of sounds, like the pads on it. So
Sure.
I was just wondering, like, if how did you come about with that sound?
Um, well, yeah, I do. I listen to a lot of um, like electronic music playlists. I guess I got into it maybe about 3 years ago. I think, um, actually, I think it was Tame Impala. I remember
Yeah,
like,
yeah, that's a big synthwave band. Yeah,
mm-hmm,
that's I'm wondering. Can I hear that? And I do hear the drums, and a lot of electronic music is on the drum machines and the drum beats. But it's also like being a synth player, my focus is like, well, when I hear like Moogs and I hear Prophet Fives or Jupiter Eights, I hear the Tom Impala. I hear that influence. I hear that sound.
yeah,
I do hear some Duran Duran, Depeche Mode, New Order. Those are all synth bands. Those are all bands that have heavy pads or interesting bass lines or interesting drum machine lines that comes from that kind of period. So yeah, that's a good um, name that gets me in the place where you are. I hear that.
yeah,
I also heard some Kraftwerk. I don't know if you know Kraftwerk, but they were like one of the first like electronic, like German bands that kind of created the influence of the new wave. Prince was highly influenced by Kraftwerk, and a lot of 1999 comes from that German band. The idea, the way he plays on 1999 is a Minneapolis sound, but it's influenced by a progressive synth band called Kraftwerk from Germany.
mm-hmm.
So, so your project, like your latest video, is for Space Jam, right? That's your latest track.
Yes, yeah.
So how did that track come about?
Um, let's see. I think that so it's funny because so that song, so I wrote it, took me a little while to write, but I think I wrote the entire song probably around March or April, I think. But that song started out as just a sketch, and I believe it was like I don't even think I had done 10 sketches at that point. So it started out as just like this really rough kind of melody idea. And then as I was kind of studying music production and composing, I slowly built up more and more tracks on it until it became what it was. So it was,
So, so,
mhm.
so do you use a digital audio workstation, and which DAW do you use?
So I use Ableton currently. I used to
Okay.
produce in GarageBand actually. Space Jam was started in GarageBand, as was Nostalgia. So GarageBand is how I started learning how to mix before I was able to get Ableton.
And then when you're in Ableton, do you have a MIDI keyboard that you connect with, or you do it all on the grid?
I do have a MIDI keyboard. It's the Akai Professional one.
So do you compose and play the chords in like real time on your MIDI keyboard and then record like track by track, or do you kind of compose in the tool itself, kind of like GarageBand, or do you do a combination of like using the MIDI keyboard and composing in the tool?
I usually just play on the controller.
Yeah, I would think like a keyboard, people who started on like keyboards and synthesizers, that's what they do. They tend to do, but I've talked to like guys who are like hip hop producers or DJs or other artists or guitar players that don't know how to play keyboard. Sometimes they just start within the tool itself and kind of know how to sight read, and then they write it in. But I've always found it's good to express yourself on the MIDI controller or on a keyboard to get the real feel of a song. So in
Mhm.
terms of your music theory and the types of soft synths you've brought in, I do hear a lot of interesting like analog like type of sound patches and sound choices that you've made that have that electronica sound, but a lot of it is like influenced by what I hear is like new wave sounds, or heavy synth wave sounds, like you said, like Tame Impala.
Mhm.
How did you go about like the layering? Did you have certain like feels you were going for
Yeah, for
in
sure.
some of the?
I'm sure, as you know, like Tame Impala is very like psychedelic. So
Yeah.
that's definitely the like the sound and the feeling that I'm going for with my music. So it's kind of I think, as I said earlier, it's really intuitive. So I'm just kind of
Hmm.
going by the feel, and usually I kind of know, you know, when I'm layering, uh, how I want it to sound. So that's what I'm going
Do you have certain Do you have certain plugins that you prefer more than others to get certain feels? Like some people, to get a Moog bass line, they'll use like a mini Moog plugin, or they'll use they're trying to do pads. They'll try to bring in like a Prophet 5, which is a famous like polysynth that has really good pads, or a Jupiter. Is there certain sounds that you, as you get into production, that you're starting to identify with certain feels? There's certain instruments that are kind of known in the synth world for certain fields, or do you just kind of go by what you have access to? Do you make selections on what soft synths you're going to bring in, or are you just using like what's resonating in the tool?
So I don't have a ton of plugins yet. I have a few, but for the most part, when it comes to like the sound or the feel I'm going for, I have a lot of presets that I've tweaked, or I think I have a few sounds that I've like designed myself, and I'll just kind of
Mm-hmm.
save them as presets, and I'll come back to them when I'm looking for that sound specifically. But I definitely do want to get to the point where I can kind of pull from a really large preset library. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, over the years, I've been playing since I was in my teens. I kind of started off with Roland sounds, which are famous for like really good pads, and because I actually have the physical Rolands, I can just use them whenever I want. But also, like over time, you find out that there's certain tones, like guitar players find out, the difference between like a Fender or a Les Paul, or the different instruments have different known sounds. And in the world of the DAW, you can get to all these as you get more capability, or you choose them. But it's interesting, you are doing sound design. So when you started to do sound design, did you take coursework to learn how to actually do sound, as to create your own patches, or it was kind of like you just explored the tool and figured out what you wanted by like what you hear is what you want?
Yeah, so I think, as I said earlier, I started in GarageBand. So actually, my first kind of introduction to sound design, I was tweaking a lot of the pads using, what is it, Alchemy Synth. So that was kind of
Okay.
my, yeah, that was kind of my first intro to the sound design. it's not quite, you can't go quite as deep as you can in like something like Serum. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, but that's kind of where I learned, what certain knobs do. So then when I actually got to Serum, it was a lot easier, at least for me, I guess, rather than if I had just started
mhm.
in Serum.
Yeah. Did you really like a lot of? I don't know if I get too far into it, but like as a synth player, a lot of us play with like the low frequency oscillators and the envelope generators to create all kinds of interesting characteristics. Like it's a lot. The more LFOs you have, or low frequency oscillators, the more modulation sources you get. And so, like an example, if you have a tone and you put a lot of LFOs on it, you can have it kind of decay and then come back and then do all these weird things. So after you like hold a chord, you can kind of keep on going and it can keep on doing all these weird effects. And it's something that sound designers eventually, they realize, okay, if I tweak these LFOs, then I get all these weird after effects happening on the sound or these strange oscillations. Have you got to the point where you know where those type of tone generation or synth techniques are, or do you just kind of is just trying to dive into your construction?
I kind of understand it. Um, I think it's something that I definitely want to um, kind of explore more. It's kind of like it's a little overwhelming sometimes because I can spend a good few hours just designing
Yeah.
sound. But yeah, I definitely love playing with LFO and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, as you get into synthesizers and you realize how you can just kind of tear apart a sound. I mean, you could take a bass sound, but if you have something like Serum or you have Ableton, you've got a full panel that dives into the oscillators, that dives into the envelopes, that dives into the filters, that you realize, okay, the effects of filters in music, if you use low pass and high pass filters or band pass filters, they have all these different effects in terms of what you're trying to do with your sound. And as you get, more experience with synthesis, it allows you to do all kinds of interesting things in terms of general concepts of subtractive synthesis versus additive synthesis versus, granular synthesis. There's so many different types of things that like sound design in itself is kind of like an art. But
Hmm.
I think anybody that gets into electronic music, it's like a rabbit hole. You can spend hours and hours trying to build a sound,
Exactly.
and that's totally different than even building the song.
Hmm.
Building the song and building the sound are like two parts of the same thing, but within synthesis, you can go crazy
Right,
in
exactly.
terms of the depth of which you can go. And with my analog synths, it's like endless what you can do with them. And so it's just like as you get into this whole art, the more tools you get, the more if you ever get your hands on a Moog or a Roland synth, you would find that your imagination can go anywhere. Um, so I just look forward to your development of what you can do, because I like what you're doing with the tools that you have now. And every time every musician's always trying to build up their tool set or what they can do. So it's interesting to hear where you are today, and then if I talk to you a year from now, see where you're going.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely looking forward to playing with an analog synth. I'm hoping to get one maybe by the end of the year. We'll see.
What just to like kind of dive into that with a lot of people, because I'm such a like a tech, well, not techie, but a synth head. So what type of synths are you looking at?
I would probably go for a Moog, honestly. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they're cool.
which one? Because I have a grandmother, I have a mother 32, and I have a DFAM.
I have no idea. I have no idea. It's like super overwhelming to me, but I'm sure I'll I'll figure it out.
Yeah, well, the Mini Moog is one of the most famous ones. The one Parliament Funkadelic used.
Hmm.
It's the one that like a lot of new wave artists use them. The grandmother is kind of like a modern Mini Moog. It's a keyboard based Moog. The other ones like the DFAM is a drum machine Moog. It's analog drum machine, and then the Mother 32 is a smaller analog synth. Uh, but they have so many different types of Moogs. I mean, there's many Moogs, but each of them have their own character, and they all
Hmm.
have their own kind of purpose of what they can do. But yeah, Moogs, I would agree as a synthesizer. like if you already have a tool like Ableton, the Moog will give you like really good bass lines. It will even, they can create drums too. Like they can create pretty much anything. And so then you could give a lot more heft to your mix when you bring a Moog in. The analog signals just cut into the mix when you're recording. They have such a presence compared to digital sound that sometimes they can overwhelm your mix, but you just realize that it's going to take a lot of your mix. Once you bring an analog signal in, it's going to be so heavy or so powerful that you kind of leave it in its own space and then not try to. Uh, it kind of will overwhelm your mix if you have a lot of digital stuff. That the analog signal tends to overpower, and that's one of the reasons why analog kind of went away, but now it's come back. Is people realize that's how you use it. It's kind of a combination of using analog, digital, and sampling. If you use all of them at different points, like if you're writing, you write in terms of like a sound painting, and each sound is like a color, and certain colors have certain purposes for your overall result. But that's how I kind of
Mm-hmm.
get at
Yeah,
it.
so they say
um,
like analog equipment tends to be like more like warm sounding, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, my modes, like I have a Roland that I use for piano, and I use it for pads because a Moog can only do single notes. But a Moog single note, I can make my Moog single note sound like a three-part chord. It has like three oscillators, and so what it can do is with one note, I can make it sound like I'm holding, like five fingers on a Roland because it's so powerful. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you use so it's even though you only can do monophonics uh, on the modes I have, because the polyphonic modes are super expensive, but it can actually equate to the level of sound in a chord. You can actually make each oscillator be like a part of a chord. And so when you actually hit that one note, it sounds like a chord. So there's all kinds of cool things you can do with it, even though it's monophonic. But it gives you that's this warmth that, if you go back and you listen to famous records, from the 70s, like from Yes and Genesis and Duran Duran in the 80s, you can hear that. Like a Jupiter 8 is a Moog. Duran Duran used it on Rio. It's real. You can hear it because it kind of cuts through the mix. It's like you hear these synth sounds that are so present. The reason they're so present because it's analog.
Mm-hmm.
um, but it's cool. You can't sample, so you can't do the sampling that a lot of people do today. You can't do some of the interesting things that digital synths can do. So there's still reasons to use, the digital capabilities that digital synths have. But analog is really good for bass lines, really good for leads, good for like experimental kind of arpeggiation. Because you can do all kinds of like random voltage generators. They can make all these. You can basically make loops on analog synths that are very tight, like you would do with a sampler, but they're actually analog, and they can create these little, like what people call clips today. You can create clips on these things, and you just keep on layering these clips into your DAW, and they're all analog. They have a different character than like a sampling based clip, but it's just a different way of recording. Once you get into it, you'll probably like it a lot.
Yeah, it sounds cool for sure.
um, so the projects that you've been working on SoundCloud, are they part of a bigger project? I know you've been releasing individual songs, and I have seen like you have some projects that are out here, like you have Arrangements Volume One that has a bunch of like tracks on it, but then you've got a lot of single projects. Are you working on toward like an EP or an album?
I am. I have like a kind of a theme in mind, and I have a few sketches that I think they would all sound really good on an EP. So that's something that I'm definitely going to be working on. Hopefully, maybe next year.
So when you put together like an EP, is it like you're trying to have one coherent theme so that they're individual songs, but do you feel like they all kind of fit in the same project? That's kind of like the whole idea of an album or an EP, is you've got songs that seem to fit together. Is that the overall idea? Like if you put something out like that, they're all gonna it's gonna make a statement that's kind of the sum of is the whole of its parts.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I had I had a few sketches that were very, I think for one of them, I called it a lullaby with a beat, and a lot of people liked it. They said it sounded like super relaxing. So I,
Just like ambient music or more ethereal.
yeah, definitely. But it had a really, I did like drum work on it. So it's kind of like ambient plus, like
Plus
drums. Yeah.
drums.
So I have a bunch of sketches actually that kind of fall in that kind of category. So I can definitely see myself making an EP out of it.
It's interesting you refer to your songs as sketches, and a lot of times when I talk to artists, I kind of bring up that idea that like George Martin, the Beatles producer, and Jimi Hendrix talked in terms of music as sound paintings,
Hmm.
and it's in bring up sketches because I think music can equate to painting because what George Martin had said about the Beatles was, I don't want to record the Beatles like they were in Berlin. I want to record them like a painter like Monet, which means I don't want it to sound like they would in front of a crowd. When I go to do the project as an album, I want to use all these tools to actually make it sound different than reality. And that's one of the things that's interesting that the kind of the Beatles and Hendrix brought to the table. These tools that we see now in the DAWs and in overall music production that you don't necessarily have to sound like you do if you were playing a live show. That your album is a representation of kind of an idea of a sound painting or what you call a sketch.
I'm actually a painter, so that's a really interesting analogy. So I actually do
So
art.
do you hear your stuff as like colors? Do you kind of see it as a painter when you're doing your work? Do you see your music in the same terms as an artist, or like a painter?
Yeah, totally. Because even when it comes to just like arranging a song, like writing a song, there's so many layers to it. And when I'm doing a painting, there's layers to the painting too. There's kind of like, you kind of like do a
Yeah,
rough, like a rough draft of the
rough draft.
painting, and then you
Yeah,
kind of build up and fine tune everything. And then, the final product is really polished. And that's exactly how I feel as a producer. My arrangements are kind of rough. Then I kind of clean it up, and then, I do the mixing to kind of enhance all of the sounds. And then the end result is, the finished product, the polished product.
that's what I like about talking to singer songwriter producers is that you get a unified vision from the artist. That if you work with somebody else, it's different because it's kind of a collaboration. But I like dealing with people who write their own stuff or produce their own music because then you get a real full picture of that artist. You get to feel and hear their vision. I think it's in a different way. I think it usually is pretty honest interpretation of who they are rather than if they're working with somebody else that's kind of like, if you're in a hit machine or you're a producer that's trying to do like popular top 10, top 50 music, there's certain expectations that you're going to fit certain things. But singer songwriters are very unique. And so I like to listen to like kind of like the underground or the people who are independent artists because you get to hear stuff that's kind of cutting edge because people are doing things and they're trying things that maybe other people wouldn't do. And so it's always like very satisfying to see what's going on. Um,
Yeah, there's actually two artists who I had written down that whose work I really like and that kind of reminded me of them. There's Grimes and there's
yeah.
Flume. And
Mm-hmm.
I really like those two specifically because both of them are self-taught producers. And obviously they make all of their own work completely. Like they write their own music, they mix their own music, they master their own music. So that's like it's super inspiring to me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I wanted to get into your drum programming too because as a producer and as somebody that does the whole song, you say you did indicate that you start with the drums, which is what a lot of people do in music. You start with the drums. Um, so how do you come up with your beats? In terms of the tools you use now in your DAW, do you start them on your MIDI controller or in a sequencer, kind of like something that would act like an 808 or a 909 type of drum machine, kind of typical drum sequencing, kind of laying it down in that kind of TR recording method, or what type of method do you use for building your beats?
So I'm not sure if this is standard, but I kind of start with each part of the drums. Like I don't necessarily like do like the kick and the snare and the hi-hats all at the same time. I kind of
Mm-hmm.
just, I focus on the kick, like what I want the kick to be.
What the kick to be?
Hmm.
So you just put that down and then you'll kind of build on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of I have a couple of tools. Like I have a cool thing from Teenage Engineering called OPZ that allows you to put down drum lines by, you just start this 16-step sequencer. You can hit the kick in, you can pick what one of the kick you want. You get like a 16-step thing, and you can either put them in on step recording or real time do it, and then you can play with the quantizing. And so sometimes what I like to do is totally unquantized stuff, and it's very loose. And then you kind of like, okay, well that's not tight enough. But sometimes you can get a lot of cool experimentation and something that's not typical if you don't quantize initially. So what are your feelings on like quantizing and unquantizing, or have you gotten into that kind of depth on your drum beats?
Um, I do quantize sometimes. Um, I kind of have watched and read some stuff about it, kind of breaking away from quantizing because it makes it sound, kind of too perfect. So I kind of understand
Yeah,
that. Yeah, kind of trying to make it sound more human, like a human
right.
played it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
If the thing about quantizing is it gives you the perfect beat, but it's a little too robotic. and
Right.
and sometimes like if you like I'm a big fan of jazz. Like I like listening to Miles Davis and Coltrane. And if you listen to jazz at all, jazz drummers are famous for not, they don't do quantized beats.
Hmm.
They're like live human beings, and they're kind of all over the map, and they can get to what could be thought of as a quantized beat, but then they'll go off, and then maybe they'll come back to it. And I've always been very impressed with like progressive music and jazz music because it can have these polyrhythmic things going on that aren't always in time, which forces you to kind of write in a different way. I
Hmm.
think it makes it more interesting. And so I think it's some modern music tends to do a lot of quantizing, which I think is cool if you want to dance, but maybe not as interesting if you're trying to do something like experimental.
Right. Like another thing I like too are like broken beats. I find like those super interesting, and obviously I've kind of tried to write some kind of broken type beats, and obviously it'd be hard to
Like
quantize that.
yeah, kind of glitching beats. Like I've been playing with samplers
Hmm.
that sample beats and then you glitch them out because you'll take a beat, like you sample it and then you change the timing on it, and then you kind of like you force a glitch. You force kind of like a thing where it's a little off because you purposely took something that was perfect, then you kind of changed the timing in the middle of it, or you added a polyrhythm to it. They tear it apart. It's kind of like if you listen to like Public Enemy and Bomb Squad, they used to do some really innovative things with beats where you kind of glitch it. Um, and we hear it in like glitch kind of like genres of electronic music that have this kind of new capability that you can do. But yeah, that's something that's really interesting
Hmm.
that you can get into. Well, unquantizing will do it too, but you can be more forceful than just even that. There's things you can play with. So when after you start with your beats, what's like the next thing when you write a song? Or does it change from song to song? Because I've talked to songwriters and they'll say, well, like every song's different, and I don't have a standard way of doing it. Or do you have like a process that's somewhat similar for what you do, or do you kind of just each song requires something different, so you do something different?
Yeah. I can start creating a song in kind of a number of ways, really. So sometimes I start with a chord progression and I kind of start adding tracks and building it up like that. Or, like I said before, I start with the drums, make a beat, and then maybe I'll start the chord progression from there. Um, and then another thing I'll do is I like using samples. I like using loops. I don't really mind using that because sometimes just a sample can inspire a whole song for me. So those are really the three ways that I compose songs.
So I mean, I've been, getting into more. I tend to do like a non-DAW type of recording, um, but I've been kind of going back and forth between using DAWs and kind of doing traditional recording. And I do have samplers. I have like these like Eurorack samplers, and I do sometimes start with a sample of of a drum or something off a drum machine, and then I'll sample it, and then I'll put it in a loop. So I was wondering, like, there are a lot of people today, they use like clip based um, like programming, like what you'll see like on an MPC or on a groove box like an MC707, or even within an Ableton Live, there's like clip based placing of your sequences or your samples, or scene based type of arrangement. Are you diving into that? Or how do you uh, navigate all those different types of ways of doing things?
I haven't really gotten into that yet. So when it comes to like making an arrangement, yeah, I tend to do like in Ableton, I tend to use the arrangement mode. I think the mode you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about is there's like that other mode that you can switch to, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not quite, I don't know, it intimidates me a little bit. So I use I
Yeah, a lot of hip hop producers are kind of, they don't tend to use the arrangement mode as more as that road to kind of take all these clips, and then they kind of use like non-traditional MIDI controllers, which are more like groove boxes or things that are like, if you ever see like an MPC one, or like any of the groove boxes they make from like Electron, or there's all these different things that are kind of grid based groove boxes, and so it allows you to kind of think non-sequentially. If you have this grid, you can kind of pop around a grid rather than going in a bar, and it allows you to kind of pop the clips around and the scenes around in a different type of structure, which is hip hop is a lot of hip hop producers use it, a lot of DJs use it, but traditional songwriters like myself, I like to do like arrangement mode, like you. I tend to do that, but sometimes if I want to do something really different, I'll go into like a clip based thing and kind of jump around my samples and clips, and kind of DJ it and create a song that comes from like a DJ perspective rather than a traditional perspective. This changes things up.
Mhm.
Um, if you want to have something that's a little off kilter.
Yeah, that's something I'm definitely uh want to learn for sure, how to use that mode.
Yeah, because there's a lot of new things that has been happening lately. Is people are wanting to use these groove boxes, because if you go to do a performance and you have like a groove box, like an Akai MPC, or Akai Live or something, it allows you to do like a performance live instead of just like running off like a CDJ. You can like kick off your song as clips, and you're just hitting this grid, and you can kind of change it up live. So it has the aspect of being a DJ, but you have more control over what you're doing. So if you go to play like in New York or something, and you had your song, you don't just have to run it off a sequencer. You can kind of change it up like an old school DJ with vinyl. You use these pads to kind of click your song off. You could have everything kind of chained together as a song, or you can kind of just rearrange it on the fly in front of everybody, which gives you some really cool control as you think about performance if you're doing live performance.
Yeah, which is really cool because then, no two performances will sound exactly the same.
Yeah, I'm kind of like an old school guy like that, because I like jazz and I like funk and stuff, and any kind of tool that lets you not just put it on play and do it exactly the way you did it. anything that gives you some freedom to express yourself, but you don't necessarily have to even use a keyboard to do it. You can have this kind of clip-based system, and you could run it sequentially like in song mode, or you could just kind of change it up as you feel. And so if you want to go out and give the people the song you wrote, you can do it. And then in the middle, if you want to change it, you could just do it. So it gives you a lot of control as an artist, and you don't have to carry as much gear around.
Yeah, yeah.
But it just is a cool thing to be able to do with like the machines I told you about, like the Roland MC 707 and Electron and MPCs. They a lot of hip hop guys use them because it gives them capability to perform live without being stuck on a CDJ, which is kind of limiting. You know, you can do some cool stuff with a CDJ, but you can do more with a grid-based control system. So that goes toward, have you been thinking about doing live shows? Were you doing live shows with Project P before the pandemic, or were you getting ready to, or you have them scheduled for the future?
I would definitely like to play live. I haven't before. The idea honestly freaks me out a little bit, but I do want to work toward it. I'm trying to practice the keys more. Just to get comfortable with, you know, the instruments and the gadgets and stuff. So maybe in a few years. Yeah.
So would you do it like if you were going to perform your songs? You would kind of just play the chords out, play the leads as like a keyboard player would do it, or would you do it like a DJ, or do it like what I was talking about, like with running clips off and maybe having combination of a non-traditional controller, like a grid-based controller with a keyboard? Just wonder how you would think about performing.
Yeah, I think at first I was thinking, you know, just performing it like on the keys. But now that you mentioned the kind of that grid method, I feel like even though I'm not quite accustomed to it, I think it would probably be a little easier on me to do. So that's definitely something I want to look into.
Yeah, because I used to go to New York City, and I would bring my Roland, but I have like this Beat Step Pro, which is like a pad-based sequencer, and it allowed me to do like 3 lines of sequencing, and I could chain songs together and save them as projects. Where I could chain parts together and they'd be a whole song, and so I could have like 16 projects on this thing, and it's connected to my synthesizers, my live synthesizer. So I could go into a show in New York, which I did in 2017, and I could be a one-man band because it's got like a drum sequencer, and then it had like 4 other lines where I could actually have other sequences going. And then I would go and have my Roland keyboard to play piano parts and guitar parts and whatever live, and then have all this preset stuff that I did. But unlike like just playing to a backing track, I could change it up in real time. I could just change anything I wanted, and so it gave me a lot of capability. And that's an old setup. Today there's a lot more capability, but just using like a Beat Step Pro is a cool way of doing that. And they've got even better sequencers from them now, but that's from Arturia. So Arturia had some cool solutions for that, and they're not that expensive. My Beat Step Pro back in 2017 was like $250. Which gave me a cool capability to do that. And it links through like MIDI and CV to like it would work with like Ableton. It could actually kick off sequences from Ableton, which is a cool thing.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's not a bad price either.
No, compared to some of the more, the MPCs are almost here near $1,000. So it gives you something that you could actually, it's more doable. And it's portable and it's easy to carry. They've actually created a thing called a Key Step Pro, which is a combination sequencer and keyboard that's fully polyphonic, which allows you to have pad sequences going, and it can do clips. They can do scenes, and so the new version of it's a little more. It costs like $300, but because it has a keyboard on it, and then you can link it to Ableton, you can just bring that and have really good live performances with this, like a keyboard base. You can mute and unmute tracks, so that you can use the keyboard to do a lead. You use the keyboard to do a bass. You could launch a clip while you're playing bass. you have the scenes, keep on unmuting and muting scenes and put things together as projects, and you have these big, expansive soundscapes that you can perform live, and it gives you a lot of capability. Like a lot of synthesis like that tool. And I just wanted to kind of give you, not that I work for them, but given what you do, it sounds like that machine would work really good for you.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I'll have to look into it.
Yeah. So, have you been collaborating with other musicians, or are you primarily just working on your own work, or are you actually working with other artists too?
I've been mostly working on just my own work, but there are definitely, I have a few artists who I'd like to collaborate with. I've talked to a few of them. But I actually had a friend who I wanted to record rap vocals with, but that was before the pandemic. So maybe in the future. Yeah.
So, a question I had also on the song "Nostalgia" is that your voice or a sample?
Oh, that's a sample.
So, have you thought of introducing, which maybe I haven't listened to all your songs yet, but some of the songs I haven't heard, are you going to ever do your own vocals on your work, or is it primarily more of an instrumental project?
It's mostly an instrumental project. 'Cause I'm not really a vocalist. Like I can't really sing, which is why which is why I envision myself working with other vocalists who can
Mhm.
sing and like rappers too. And
Oh, so you'd have rappers work with you, and you kind of give them the backing tracks and the overall song structure, and then they would bring the voice, or vocalist would come in and bring the voice.
mhm.
It's interesting though. This one story. I was never really a great vocalist, but then I fell in love with vocoders or vocal transformers.
Mhm.
So I didn't start singing until I was in my 50s. Um, and then I started using all this like electronic technology to alter my voice. And some of the machines out there today can actually change the character of your voice. I was working with this lady in Los Angeles, and she used to take her voice and change it to sound like a guy. uh, and then she would do electronic music and have this male voice that was her, and do kind of spoken word poetry in this male voice that came through a vocoder. So you don't just have to use auto tune with vocoders. You can actually change the whole character of your voice and create a character that can make you more comfortable in putting your own voice to your music, which is something that electronic musicians have done for years. But it's something that's like you may want to think about if you ever want to get your own voice into it. There are ways to adjust your vocal, not just auto tune, but like radically adjust your voice to make it so it might sound the way you want it to.
Yeah, that might have to be something I look into because yeah, I mean I like using vocals a lot, especially like vocal chops. So that's definitely
Mhm.
something that I want to explore.
Yeah, the machines I use, not to be selling machines, but I use a machine called a VT3 vocal transformer from Roland, and I use a VT4. The VT3 is monophonic, and the VT4 is polyphonic. And the one cool thing about a vocoder is you don't necessarily even have to sing. You can just kind of, a vocoder can actually take the notes on your keyboard. And if I use a VT4, I can take a chord, like a diminished fifth or seventh, and then I can kind of vocalize into my mic, and it will create this vocal sound that follows the keys on the keyboard, which you can use for like kind of scatting, kind of synthesizer scatting. uh, that allows you to create like vocal tones that necessarily aren't like words, but can be musical nonetheless. So a way to kind of integrate your voice into your music, and you can use it as like singing voices as well. But there's all kinds of ways to use vocoders to add that element into your music.
Sounds pretty cool actually.
Yeah, they're not that expensive either. They're pretty cool. But so on in the future, you're working on an EP. What's the target date for that?
I don't have a specific date, but I want to say January 2021. I definitely want it to be in that first month of next year.
So you think you'll have it pretty much in line for that time period.
Yeah, I think so.
So um, one of the other questions I like to ask about, like during this period of like COVID and the kind of music you're doing, what's your opinion of like how a musical artist can navigate like the current crisis? I think like a lot. I talk to a lot of bands that are like touring bands, and they've been significantly affected because they made their living doing shows. But then I have also talked to artists who are kind of like more like bedroom producers, and they weren't necessarily, affected as much because they don't really tour. They're more of like internet, social media, SoundCloud, Spotify creation. They don't necessarily have to tour. They do YouTube videos or they do other things. So what has this really significantly affected what you've been doing with this project?
Well, not really because I think, as I said before, I've never performed live, but I understand that, yeah, it has definitely affected, especially the artists who were mainly making their income by doing shows. And it kind of made me really realize that as a musician, it's really important to have kind of multiple, I guess, yeah, multiple streams of income, I guess.
Yeah,
Um, I think that, focusing on just one stream can be really dangerous.
yeah.
And, this pandemic was kind of an example of that. Um,
Well, I think it seems like the way the industry is like when I grew up, I'm in my 50s, right? So if you were a band, you had to tour to make money. But in the old days, when people bought records, if you could get, a record deal on a small label, like an indie label or college radio type label, like an SST or IRS records, like really small labels, like Sub Pop, small labels, even small hip hop labels. Um, you can sell cassettes, you could sell CDs, and you would get income from that merch. But when everything went to streaming, the income stream got so low that the only way you can make money is tour. And the other way you can make money is like sync licensing or working as a studio musician on other people's records, doing features. Um, so people who branched out and were able to do features or be able to play on other people's records or become producers on other people's records or sell, little clips for advertising found other ways to make money. But bands that just continue to drive around in a van or a bus were subject to like this kind of crisis, having a hard time. Um, so it's interesting that people are starting to navigate, find new ways to do things. A lot of the bands I've talked to are actually collaborating with other bands to work as like producers or playing bass or drums on other people's records as a way to kind of survive.
yeah. Mhm.
So you're do you have any questions or what anything you want to tell your fans that maybe they don't know about you since I have you on the line that would be interesting like aspect of your process or your life that maybe you'd like to tell your fans more about.
Um, yeah, actually, I had kind of something. I think I had been looking at the kind of the question outline that you'd asked, and I think you'd asked, where do I see the future of music
Hmm.
going? And I actually, I don't remember when I had this dream. So I had a really weird dream where I was in this like super futuristic world. It was like kind of on another planet. And it was like a very vivid dream. So I kind of remember how everything looked. Like the sky was purple and there were like two moons in the sky. So I kind of knew that I wasn't on Earth anymore. I was like, on a different planet. And it felt like I had kind of stepped out of a time machine. And there was just kind of electronic music just like playing outside. Like it was just like just coming from outside. It was like a kind of a weird movie. And I remember thinking, wow, I think this is what the future is going to look like. And this is how the future is going to sound like. And I feel like after that dream, I was kind of, I was, I've been interested in making music since 2017, but I didn't start making it until um, last year. And I think that that dream kind of propelled this project of mine. So, kind of down to the visuals that I have on my page, I wanted to kind
Yeah,
of turn that dream that I had, like that visual dream of like wherever I was like on some other planet. I wanted to turn that into um, kind of a reality through my music and through my visuals. So that's kind of a lot of people kind of comment about like the aesthetics of my page, kind of like my setup because I have these purple lights in my studio, and
yeah,
that was inspired by the dream. All of the aesthetics on my page were inspired by the dream. So yeah, that I feel like that dream strongly inspired my music style down to the visuals that I have.
yeah. It kind of brings up the visuals are a big part of what your Project P is about. From your videos and your page, the visuals on Instagram. So how much of that work is like is like, would you say that's like a 50-50 part of the project, or like a 30-70, or how much of that is integral to what you do? Like the visuals, is it like equal footing with the music?
Yeah, I would say so because even the videos that I have on YouTube, I spent a lot of time editing those because I honestly I enjoy the artists who have music videos that go with their songs because I kind of want to
Mm-hmm.
see the visuals that inspired that or kind of, like vice versa. So it's really interesting to see the visuals that go with the music. So that's why I try to um, make visuals that go with mine.
Yeah, I grew up when MTV first appeared, and it was like a revelation. Um, it was like, wow, the fact that bands like Duran Duran, they created like these like like mini movies, and then bands could actually do videos that didn't follow the song. They actually were an interpretation of the song. Um, and maybe were like just a director or the band's vision of what the song should be. So you could listen to the song on the radio, and then you look at the video and you say, "Whoa!" So that's what it means, or that's just what the band thought it means, and everybody could interpret different ways. But the visual aspects of what early MTV used to do was very powerful, and it's cool to see that the social media places like Instagram and Vimeo and YouTube are allowing artists to continue that in a more pure way.
Yeah, for
Is
sure.
that part of what you would do if you went live? Would you have like a visual show to go with your music?
Yeah, I think that would be a really awesome idea. Um, actually, yeah, that's definitely something that I would want to have. Definitely the visuals.
So like an LED screen with maybe your videos going on behind, or collages of visual ideas, or maybe like LED lighting, or all kinds of this laser shows, this all kinds of new capabilities. Holograms are getting bigger, but yeah, there's a lot of cool electronic like synchronization, especially like electronic music. There's like synchronization tools that can synchronize your video to what's going on in your MIDI. So when you go to do something live, if you've got like a visual idea, if you got this full theatrical performance, you can have it sync to the beat of your drum machine. You can have it sync to the beat of your what's going out of your equipment. So it's totally connected. So the lights could be flashing with the beat, the lasers could be going, the LED screens could be doing different things. There's a lot of cool stuff that can be done, and I've always been very inspired by artists that fully take advantage of that and bring like a Bowie-esque concept to the stage. You know, something that's like a full thought idea. Or even like Lady Gaga, she does that too. But it's cool to actually see artists that integrate that. So if that's where you're going, I'd be very impressed to see or excited to see where you're going to go with that.
Yeah, for sure. I know someone, he's like a video effects artist, I think. I'm not sure if that's the right terminology, but yeah, he told me about this program. Don't quite remember what it's called, but I think you can kind of use it with Ableton. And yeah, like you said, um, the lights kind of can go with the beat, and that's kind of super awesome. And that's definitely something that I want to look into.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff you can connect with your synths. There's a standard kind of like MIDI that allows you to link your lighting systems to your synths. So once you get that type of equipment or you link it to your DAW, it can synchronize with Ableton. It can synchronize with like Mainstay or Pro Tools, any of the systems, and it suddenly links everything up, and then you've got all this cool coordination. But you know, there's a lot of things you can do with performance. I've always been very interested in bands that are theatrical in what they do. So that's cool that's a big part of your music. So I'm excited to see that. I do like what you have on YouTube. I like what's on your Instagram channel. So I encourage everybody to check the links that are going to be on this podcast to look at the whole every aspect of your work. Don't just listen to the music. Go out to the YouTube and Instagram and look at what you're putting it down as a full project.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
So yeah, but we tend to have artists come back when they have new projects. So when your EP is ready to come out in 2021, we could love to have you on the show. If you have anything else that you're working on that would be cool that you'd like to promote, if you come up with another idea, because artists never know. You can just like be in the middle of something and suddenly come up with something else.
True.
um, yeah. So yeah, we're always on the lookout to help artists out. So if you ever have a new idea or you suddenly say, well, I'm going to drop a different EP because I got a new idea, yeah, give us a ring and we'll put this out. This is going to go out within the next hour on 11 podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify. We are part of Spotify. So there's actually linkage between Instagram, Spotify, and Anchor. And when we put the podcast link on our highlight, people will be able to go directly to the Spotify version of this podcast from our channel, and then you can like link it to your channel as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
So thank you for being on the show, Precious, and Project P. Everybody go out and check it out on SoundCloud and go check it out on Instagram and YouTube.
All right.
Thank you for being on the program.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. You too.